Hello crafty friends, welcome to today's video. In today's video I'm going to be making two cards from one background. So to get started I've got a piece of Flying Tiger watercolour paper and I'm covering it all over with dried marigold distress oxide, and I chose orange for my main colour because one of these cards is going to go to my sister as a birthday card and her favourite colour is orange. So I used my blending brush to blend an even coat of dried marigold all over this piece of paper. I then smushed some saltwater taffy onto my glass mat, squirted it with water and then used my smusher to smush it all over the orange. I wanted just to bring in a little bit of visual texture, some subtle changes in colour as well. So I smushed that all over, dried it with my hairdryer and then went in with the second layer. So this is mainly orange as I said, but there is a hint of pink in there too. Once I dried this layer with my hairdryer, I used a wet paintbrush to pick up some more saltwater taffy and I splattered that all over. Again for visual texture. My paintbrush did have a bit of white metallic shimmery paint still on it, so the pink splats have a little bit of a shimmer to them, which is nice. I plan to do a bit of foiling on this bit of paper using wow bonding powder, so I wanted it to be completely dry and I sprinkled on the wow bonding powder to check if it was dry. If it wasn't dry the powder would stick, but it was, so I set about doing my next stage, and that was to use a stencil, this very delicate mandala type stencil, and emboss with it, not heat emboss but dry emboss. So I taped the stencil down to my card just to stop it shifting around, and then I placed it in my die cutting sandwich with the embossing configuration, and then I ran it through my die cutting machine. I did add an extra shim of cardstock underneath the rubber mat just to create a bit more pressure to get the stencil to emboss a bit more deeply. And that worked perfectly. You can see here the dips when you look at the back. Without removing the stencil, I daubed on some Versamark sticky embossing ink. I just squirted a bit from the re-inker onto my glass mat, picked it up with a sponge dauber and sponged it all over, trying to get good coverage in the apertures in the stencil. And this was one of the reasons why I dry embossed with the stencil. It pushes that cardstock up into the apertures in the stencil, makes it easier to get the embossing ink on the exposed areas. It also gives a nice little bit of dimension. Once I removed the stencil, I covered the whole panel in wow bonding powder. And then I got everything ready for the foiling step because you've got to be quite quick with this, I think. So once my panel was covered in powder, next to me I put my die cutting sandwich. I then put a bit of gold foil pretty side down on one of my cutting plates. And then I melted the bonding powder, and while it was still warm I placed it face down onto that foil, popped the top cutting plate on and then applied pressure by running it through my die cutting machine. I ran it through forwards and backwards just to be on the safe side. And once it had cooled completely, I removed the foil and that left an absolutely gorgeous gold foil stencil pattern. To create two cards from this one panel, all I did was chop it in half. So I sliced it bang in the middle with my guillotine. I then tidied up the edges to make it nice and neat. My initial instinct with this card, the one that I was making for my sister, was to mat my bright shiny panel on some black to bring in a pop of contrast and make it really stand out. So that's what I did. I put tape runner on the back, I put it on some black card and trimmed it down with my trimmer. After that, I used tape runner again to stick it on the right hand side of a piece of A4 paper, which I then scored using my scoreboard and bone folder and folded into an approximately 5 by 7 inch card. I trimmed this down to size with my guillotine again. I did think about adding maybe an embellishment such as a piece of foliage or something, but I felt there was a lot going on with the stenciled pattern and the gold and the black and all the colour. So all it really needed was a sentiment. For my sentiment, I chose a really big happy birthday in a scripty font with lots of twiddly bits. I die cut this from black cardstock, but before I did, I put some double-sided sticky adhesive on the back of the card so that the die cut would come out already sticky, because I felt this was such a delicate little die cut, it was probably going to be the easiest way to stick it down, and it was. So I stuck it in the bottom left-hand corner, about a third of the way up the card. What I didn't anticipate though was where the black writing went over the black border, some of the letters looked a little bit lost. So I decided to add some gold glitter to my sentiment, and I used a Nouveau Aqua Shimmer pen thingamajig, which has gold glitter in it, and I just brushed that over the sentiment. I did get a little bit on the border, and this is one of those situations where you make a tiny little mistake, you try and fix it, and then you end up making an even bigger mistake. So to fix the glitter on the border, I picked a black felt pen and coloured over the glitter, which worked perfectly. Apart from the fact I managed to get black ink on my left thumb and one of my fingers, and I ended up leaving a black fingerprint on the front of the card. So that was a fail, but I decided to cover it up using my black dot marker and added a smattering of black dots. I decided the card was fine, but it wasn't quite working for me, and I think my main problem started with the black lettering disappearing as it crossed over the black border. So I decided to have another bash at the card, but instead of using a black mat, I decided to distress the edges of the foiled panel using my edge distresser to give them a bit of texture, and then to mat it on a piece of white cardstock just to keep everything light and airy and allow me to use a black sentiment that wouldn't disappear when it crossed over the mat. I also distressed the edges of the mat. So I assembled my card in the same way. I used tape runner, added a mat, stuck the mat on a piece of A4, scored it, folded it, cut it. For the sentiment for this card though, I chose a different die. I die cut the outline or the shadow from vellum, but before I did, I put double-sided sticky on the back so that the whole of the back of the vellum was sticky, which meant the adhesive wouldn't be obvious. And then I changed my mind about how I wanted to die cut the actual sentiment. I decided to foil some card. So I added some Elizabeth Crafts double-sided adhesive onto a piece of white card. I then covered that pretty side up in foil, pressed it down, gave it a good burnish, then peeled off the excess. I did have to press foil down on it a few times to make sure that all the exposed adhesive got some foil, and I got a nice solid gold foiled bit of card. And I chose to do it this way rather than use gold foil card that I brought from the shop, because I wanted the gold of the sentiment to match the gold that I added to the orange panel. So I die cut the happy birthday, and then I went over it again with the foil just to make sure that it was absolutely completely covered. I then added glue to the back using my glue dotter and stuck this onto the vellum. I do apologise for my nasally voice. I've got a really bad cold at the moment, but if I don't get some voiceovers recorded, I'm going to run out of videos to share. I've got lots filmed, but I need to do the voiceovers. The next thing I did was take the release paper off the back of the vellum and then place my sentiment in the bottom left hand corner, just as I did on the other card. And that's these two cards finished. I wonder which one you prefer. I like the drama of the card with the black on it, but as I say, I wasn't happy with the black on black sentiment matte thing. I do like the light and airiness of the one that I matted with white. And I think that's the one that I'm going to give to my sister for her birthday. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope it's given you some ideas of things you can do in your own card making. If it has, please do let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you back here very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.